see, is my microphone work? Yeah, my icon's lighting up. Cool. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm a minute or two late. I'm on the tail end of a cold, so I was draining the liquids out of my body right before I started the video. I figured that wouldn't be a good intro to a video. Somebody sneezing and coughing and going crazy. That's not the greatest thing to see. Howdy.
Howdy.
How you doing?
Good. How are you, Ammon?
Doing all right. I'm at the tail end of getting over a cold. I was saying that's why I'm a couple minutes late. I was draining fluids from my face.
Gotcha.
I figured that's not a good way to start a video, so I did that. Did that real quick on the side.
You blow your nose with, or like you use the tap water to blow your nose, or no?
No, I'm actually going to start this evening. Well, not
Yeah.
the tap water, but like a filtered.
Yeah, use the filtered water. We just had a report one person died.
Yeah, any kind of bacteria or anything.
Yeah, the brain-eating bacteria here in Washington State. Yeah, she had a sinus infection, and then she was using tap water too.
Crazy. I don't even drink our tap water. I only drink it filtered.
Yeah, me neither.
So yeah.
But I actually did. I do have a habit to get some water in my nose and then blow my nose in the morning when I wash up. That's now I'm trying to change that habit.
Yeah. My wife and I got a cold at the same time.
Oh dang.
And mine got bad enough. I actually went somewhere to make sure I didn't have anything like more hardcore. Typically, I can just like pound some vitamins and take a nap, and I'm like, okay, I'm better.
Cool.
But yeah, the doctor was like, oh yeah, you should do like all the nasal rinse stuff and take these things. My wife was like, oh yeah, I've been doing that, and my cold ended like 2 days ago.
Oh.
I was like, why didn't you say anything? You're suffering, and now you're better, and just tell me to do this. You're supposed to keep me from doing stupid stuff.
Right. That's yeah. That's funny.
All right, so this workshop is going to be about Spring Framework. Right. So a lot of our lessons and material cover Spring Framework, but we don't ever really delve into like what it is and how it works, which kind of helps in some troubleshooting and debugging, and especially when it goes wrong, knowing kind of what pieces and what frameworks and setups it has helps potentially resolve a lot of those issues. Because if it went perfectly all the time, nobody would ever have issues, but it'd be great if it worked that way, but it typically doesn't. So I have a workshop folder in my Spring tool suite here. Let me browse to the right workspace. Spring, I got too many folders. Cool. And Spring Tool Suite is just Eclipse with some custom plugins and tools added onto it. That's why they look like 99% the same. You can actually do the same thing by installing a couple plugins in Eclipse, but the STS editor is just slightly bit more fine-tuned for their stuff.
Gotcha.
Let me get my video in front of me so it doesn't look like I'm staring off in space on the side. All right, so I'm just gonna make a basic new Spring Starter project, right? And there's, as opposed to like a normal Java project, there's a whole lot of information in here, right? Most important is the name of the project. I call this guy Demo Project. It gives you a group name, right? Typically in, let me open up a little notepad window because this will be really cool too. I got way too many tabs in there. Close, right? No. I like programs with tabs, but I always end up with way too many tabs. So for example, typically we have package names like com example.demo, right? And they're a reverse domain name.
Yep.
And they are actual pieces. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what those pieces are called. Demo package. They correlate to a couple of these boxes here. I can never remember what order. Okay, so it is. So typically the first two are domain. Common example is the domain. And then demo is typically the artifact. Right. So typically the first two are usually pretty generic. Either it's like you think of that as like the company, right? A lot of times I do like com.Ammon King. That way after that, it's all my projects. I'm gonna make like a demo project or a my cool application project or a calculator project. Like 3/4 of it lines up, but then the last little bit of the individual project. So the group, and then it takes the name and throws it in this artifact spot. And then it shows you kind of a default package, which typically I'm okay with leaving it com example demo. If I was actually trying to sell this or ship it out somewhere, I'd be more concerned about making sure this is named right. But just for lessons and examples and learning, typically 99% of the time I stick with com example demo.
Yeah, same as we were doing in Java, right? They just how. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
If you want to be nice and change it up and do your own custom ones, as long as you're consistent, stick with it.
Okay.
Right. I always try to make sure that everything is on Java version 8. Java 11 has come out, but support in a lot of places and editors is 50-50 right now. So it will work with 11, but 8 is going to be a lot more stable and robust at this point. Maybe in a couple months, but 8. All right, and then next. So here's where we're going to be adding dependencies in our project. These are like NPM packages that are going to be pre-installed for us. Generally, we want one called web. And this web guy, when we hover over them, they actually have a cool pop-up that tells us what exactly they're going to do. Right. Full stack web development with Tomcat and Spring MVC. Right, hover over that again here. Or not?
Yeah, that's the one.
Maybe. There we go.
The one we're doing, yeah.
There's some guides and some references, but web. 99% of the time, we're going to start with web because that gives us all the basic tools to start with. Later on in lessons, we'll pull in things like JPA or JDBC. Yeah, some of these names are in multiple places, so it's important to make sure you're doing the right one. Because like this cloud AWS JDBC and this JDBC guy down here are completely different. And then as well with like security. There's a core security one we do in like lesson 7, 8, or 9 farther down the chain to add some security in here. But for right now, we'll just do web. And it is nice enough that once you add one of these once, it'll put it at the top for like a pre-selected commonly used. The next screen just gives us some basic information. It's kind of some pre-packaged information about your site that, again, if you're deploying it or publishing it or selling it, this becomes more important. But for us at this point, we're just going to press finish. I'm actually hoping this goes slower than normal, because when we can see this working, it's actually pretty cool. At the bottom right, we can see it's actually importing stuff. And my demo project, if I expand it real quick, looks pretty trim. So behind the scenes, it's going in and looking at all those packages I told it would install and actually installing them in. And then it will rebuild the project. It'll take it a second.
Yeah, similar to the NPM node that we were doing.
Yeah, same type of thing. You can see now this looks a whole lot more robust.
Yeah.
Right, a whole lot more stuff here. Some of these things don't actually exist. Like if I go into this project, here's my demo project, right? Some of those folders showed up, but a lot of the, where are we going there? Yeah, a lot of these are just kind of pre-grouped subfolders. Main resources is sitting here in source.
Yeah, the test part, I couldn't figure out what it's for. I did see main, and main is the main where we're going to be writing stuff changing, but the test, I couldn't figure out what that is for.
Source test Java is more for like unit tests, kind of more testing your code. It comes with some testing scaffolding built in. It's a much more in-depth topic because to run unit tests, you really have to be good at writing the code in the first place. But it does come with it by default. A lot of frameworks come with testing by default nowadays because they figure it's better to have it in it than to have to add it in after the fact.
Gotcha.
But that one is kind of grayed out to show that it is something kind of inactive. We have the JRE system library. That's the same library we have for making regular Java projects. And then we have the Maven dependencies. These are all the dependencies that pull down to be able to run, well, just basic Spring, and then the web project we put on top of it. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in there. And again, when it builds down the project, it'll kind of compile those together for us. Right? And then we have a POM XML, which is kind of like our package.json for NPM and Node. So this goes through, it gives some information about the project. A lot of this is the stuff we saw in that first screen. Right? Like the group ID, the artifact, the version. Basically that first screen setup makes this file, then everything else runs out of here.
Gotcha.
Right? So if we were to go and find other dependencies and manually add them in, we would be adding them into here. There's not really a command line to add those in. We'd be manually editing the POM XML file. Right, so this is kind of like the dependencies, the dev dependencies section of a package JSON.
Gotcha.
Right. And I think, yeah, later on in some of the lessons, we go over MBN repository, where to find these and how to bring them in.
So it's like a configuration file, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it just shows like what version numbers it's using, what versions of Spring, what Java version, right? Basically, this is one of the files that's first created, and then when it's doing that building and running in the background, is going through here and downloading everything.
Gotcha.
Which is pretty cool. And then a Spring Boot project comes built in with a couple pieces of technology, right? It has a self-enclosed Tomcat web server. So anytime you run a Spring Boot project, it stands up its own web server, which is kind of cool. Right, it's all kind of prepackaged. You just run it, and then everything you need to run it is already there. Right? You can kind of think of more modern than tech worlds becoming like containers, VMs, kinda. That kind of concept where your application is almost wholly self-enclosed. You can stick it somewhere and run it, and it just runs. You don't need much pre-installed. Right? Besides Java, in our case, we probably need Java 8 installed, and then it would run. But outside of that, it kind of comes with everything it needs.
Cool.
So right now, if I run this guy, we'll see all that pop up. So I'm going to run as, I can run as a Spring Boot app. I try to make everything run as a Java application, just so I know that it's not using anything extra I'm not accounting for. I'm fairly confident these two will run identically. But I can run a standard Java project as a Java application and Spring Boot as a Java application, so it's one less thing for me to remember. And it's building out my application. We'll see the console will pop up with all of our Spring Boot information. It's going through and building our application. We can see that it spun up a Tomcat server on port 8080. That's where now if I open up a browser window and go to localhost 8080, right, I get the Spring icon, sorry, white label error page, which is good. That's pretty much saying, you know, you have kind of the guts of an app, but there's nothing else there. There's no pages for us to give to you, right? But if my application wasn't running, right, I would get just like a normal
404.
Yeah, I would just get like a site can't be reached. Like there's nothing listening on there.
Yep.
Right.
So if you would ever want to change default port 8080, would you go to that XML? Where would you change that?
There's actually a part in application properties. So this application properties is the central place for generic settings for the application. So you think of the POM XML as like infrastructure and setup.
Mm-hmm.
Application properties is our more specific application configuration.
Gotcha. So it's like more, got it.
And in here, there's actually a property for server.port equals, they did like 8081. Right? There's a whole lot of settings for these application properties.
All right, cool.
On what packages you have installed, some of them have their own properties too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ever wanted a different port, that's the setting for it.
Gotcha.
If I run this again, it should pop up and tell me it's on 8081.
Oh, sweet.
Right. So just a real quick setting will do that for you.
Got it.
There is autofill on here sometimes. Spring. Yeah, it's not too happy with me.
Got it.
But yeah. Trying to think, I thought I saw a page a little bit ago for application. Like all of the options. That's not what I wanted. Apparently there is a website called application.properties. That is not at all what I wanted to go to. Here, I'll pull up the page. This is pretty much just off of the Spring documentation.
Uh-huh.
They have common application properties, and there's a big list of.
Oh, that's good. That's really helpful.
There's a lot in there. All right, this is a big honkin'.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a big list.
Cool.
Most packages that you'll add in, like third party, will tell you what settings they have.
Mm-hmm.
Say like, here's the settings we need to configure for this. Like when we're connecting to SQL or SQLite databases, they have their own application settings as well.
Gotcha.
This is a pretty handy page to have. I'll put this in the chat. I wonder if that will show up on the recording. I don't know if the chat shows up on the recording, but I'll pop it in my notepad real quick so that it's a big font. Right?
Yep.
And I just, I wish I had this page memorized off the top of my head. I just did application properties Spring in Google search and just like the second result.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, at least if I'm going to be searching, I know what it looks like in the end. So I'll find something that looks like this.
Yeah, it's just a big, there's logging configuration. Where's there?
Yeah, and changing port was the kind of main, yeah, there you go. That was the main question for me because I was wondering that. Okay.
Yeah, there's all sorts of, like you could change the network address if you wanted to, or you could change some SSL settings if you're trying to do some security. Like access logs, and you have access to all the Tomcat settings. There's a lot of stuff in there. It's pretty neat. Pretty much since it is spinning up a Tomcat server, it can pass it off configuration as it needs to. Cool. So yeah, so it's running a Tomcat server, right? And so then, especially with Spring, we have a couple different buttons at the top, right? So if this is running right now, and I try to run it again, it should give me an error message.
Yeah, that was my second question. I was wondering when you're gonna get there. So
say the Tomcat connector configured listen failed to start, right? And that is because my other page is still running.
Yeah, and how do you kill it down?
Right. So then at the top we have a stop button. Right. That will stop them from running.
So if you're running, and if you do Control F11 again, oh, you stopped it. Okay. Yep. So if you're so while it's running, so you do Control F11 again.
Yep. It'll try to run again, and then we'll get that error message. Right.
But it shows it's running. Okay, so I was getting a different response. I was getting a console message exactly the same as you were getting, saying applications failed to start. My application was actually not in the running state. Oh, I was looking at the console, the red square, red button to stop. Not, yeah. Okay. All right.
So
That's how
then,
I stop it there.
so then typically for running a Spring application, I have a slightly different pattern for when I start it and then when I want to keep on running it.
Mm-hmm.
So then the first time we start it, especially from scratch, since there's no run configuration, we need to tell it to run as. But every time after that, there's there's a fourth button that's a stop. There's a relaunch button.
Mm-hmm.
And that one will stop it and then restart it.
Okay, perfect. That's good.
Pretty much the first time, you can actually press that one at the very beginning to launch it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you've launched it once, you can just keep on hitting that button to stop and restart it.
Okay, perfect.
It's pretty handy. And that one pretty much that will resolve any of those type of errors where it's already running, the port's already in use.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah, the relaunch. Or worst case, if there's ever any weird problems or quirks, just stop it and then manually replay it.
Right.
Can't hurt.
Yeah, I was trying to hit the red stop button on the console bar at the top.
Yeah, that should do the same thing.
But if you're running and you're trying to rerun it and running into where it's failed to start, that red square becomes disabled.
Yeah,
and you can click close here, and now that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, because it's really only showing the one. You can go to some of the other consoles. Does it have that other console running? Stack trace.
Maybe.
Get to the other console windows.
Mm.
That one's right there.
There you go.
Not the most intuitive icon or thing in the world. And switch between them.
Mm-hmm.
I wish this was like a little drop-down tab or something. Because it does open up another console window, but it doesn't ever really tell you it's doing that.
All right. No, now I got it. I know how to kill it if I run into the same issue, and I know how to rerun without running into issues where it actually stops and reruns. Perfect.
And then, like worst case, it'll take a minute, but just close Spring Tool Suite. When it closes, it's supposed to terminate all of its processes. Just start back up.
Yeah, it's good.
Not the most fun thing to do in the world if you have to do it over and over again, because it does take a minute to spin up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Tomcat being the kind of the biggest thing behind the scenes that it's running, but it doesn't really, not that super obvious that it's running it, besides a couple log options. Right. Let's actually see if I can get to that Tomcat. I'm curious to see if I can get to the Tomcat management.
Should be 81.
Ah, that's right. No, I thought I could get to that Tomcat manager port. Is it 8081?
Yeah, it was in the log 8081. Tomcat initialized in 8081.
Maybe it's running a maybe it's running a trim down. Yeah, it doesn't look like I can get to the Tomcat manager stuff. Because typically Tomcat has like a whole management console and stuff. Since it's baked in, it's really only supposed to be running one application with its settings. Right? You're not supposed to really be able to dig into it after the fact and change stuff. I was hoping to show that. Because the Tomcat web server, kind of like IIS for Windows servers. Right? Kind of like when you're deploying an app to it, it's just a web server to basically it's a servlet running engine, and Spring compiles down to servlets. So things that are built to listen to responses and listen to requests and give back responses. Okay. Think of like basic websites, web applications. Tomcat. And Tomcat has been around forever. Has this lovely cat icon. Tiger? I don't know. It's a cat or a tiger. 50-50. Right? With all sorts of weird, I don't know what that is on its face. But yeah, I'm guessing like I would go on a limb and say a very high percentage of the internet runs off of Apache Tomcat. since it is a pretty robust system. Cool. And what other good info do we have here? That's a big command line. Initialize, root, initializing there, started it, and then completed initialization.
The one other thing that I ran into and it was helpful for me to find is when I was trying to start Spring Tool Suite, I was getting an error message about not finding Java in the right place. So I actually ended up going to scs.ini and adding dash, actually hyphen VM space, and next line is the location of where the GRE is. Not here, but like actually in your file system, if you go to where the STS is installed.
Ah, okay. Where's my? I got too many folders. I gotta find the folder real quick. I know you're on my desktop. There we go.
So
This guy?
It was STS. Yeah. Well, actually, since you named it differently, yeah, that would be in that one. If you open with the Notepad, yeah, you had another line at the top, dash or hyphen VM, and without the, and then the next line below, and you just do C:/ program files, blah blah, and then you just drill down, and the ending piece of that line is Java w.exe, I believe. I can look at that. But yeah, as soon as I added that line, it found where my GRE is, and I was able to run it with no issues.
Okay. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you didn't install the Java JDK.
I do have it. I just have two different versions, and I think it got confused. I have some other software that runs with the Java, and some of that runs on the 32-bit, and some of that runs on the 64-bit, and I think that's where it got confused. So
because Eclipse will pick up on the JRE by default, and Spring typically requires the JDK to be installed for it to pick that up by default. Right? It wants that JDK to be there for more development, building type focused.
Right.
The JRE will run any Java code without any problems, but since Spring is building stuff, it needs a bit more access to the libraries. And then if you have JDK 11, I think it'll still work with Spring. I haven't tried it yet. I've been meaning to see what. I'm fairly confident some stuff would break. I don't know if it's going to pick it up by default. But yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that helped. I found a solution on the web that actually worked. Before I arrived at that one, tried a few different ones, but that worked for me, and now my Spring works okay. I'm able to run Tomcat and everything. So
awesome. Cool. That's good. So then I wanted to go through one of the lessons. What was that lesson? HTTP and servlets. The second lesson, right? Because this is where we start talking about like how all this stuff communicates and works, and what are like web requests really, and what's really going on here. Because we get like all the HTTP verbs and stuff going in, and that stuff is all fun and hunky-dory. Right? It's one of those things too that we show examples of building it like a low level first, and then after that we use like the MVC frameworks for building controllers that are a bit more robust. But a controller actually is this code behind the scenes. It's just prepackaged for us. So for example, I'm going to make a quick little servlet as soon as I can find my application that I want.
And just one correction on my statement for whoever is going to be watching that workshop later. Mm-hmm. It ends with a java.exe, not java.w.exe, that line. Basically drilling to Java JDK version /bin/java.exe. That's the line for configuration file, ini. INI. All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay. I was actually going to see if I could find that real quick. So you said you did it with or without a W at the end?
I did it without a W. Yeah. At first I said it was a W, but no W there. I just checked.
Okay. Kind of one of those things where if it works, it works.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Or that servlet. Where was my example page I want to look at? I want this thing. I want to get request. Here we go. So I'm going to make my own custom class in here real quick. I'm going to call this demo servlet. Demo servlet. So what are servlets, right? I was gonna just do a quick Google for the definition because if off the top of my head, I could tell you a good definition of what a servlet was. That is not a good definition either. We'll do this one, right? Servlet is basically a Java program that runs on a web server, right?
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. Instead of running straight on your system, it runs inside of the Tomcat system. And it requires all the stuff on Tomcat to get going. Let me zoom in a little bit here. Cool. So Spring is full of annotations that typically start with an @ symbol. Right? That's how we tell Spring. Spring is very reflective in looking at its own code for stuff. These annotations are how it finds out pieces of the framework and the structure to be able to build things together.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We never really need to go from one file to another and reference them too directly. Right? As long as we add in specific things to tell Spring the things that it needs, it kind of just knows where to go. So as long as I do this other annotation, on the main application, I need to tell it that it's going to look for servlets. Right? I need to bring in an annotation to my main application file. I can put that right above the Spring Boot application. So this will tell it, scan all the files for servlets, then load up a Spring Boot application. And it'll run, it'll bootstrap itself. My demo servlet, then I have a @web servlet. I need to give this an address. I'm going to call this beans. I don't know. That's my default word. Right. Cool. So I'm going to make a get method real quick. I want this to send information when somebody requests it. So I'm just going to say protected. Oh, I need to extends HTTP servlet. Right, that's the base thing that knows how to listen to requests. So I'm pretty much building my own class, piggybacking on top of all sorts of pre-built functionality. And this guy is telling me I need to add some things. So I need a serial version UID. It's not wholly necessary, but if it's complaining about stuff, it's usually better to make it happy. Right? And thankfully, this guy will generate it for us. This kind of goes in tandem with this web servlet, that it gives this component a unique identifier. So when the system is kind of building and putting this stuff together, it makes sure it never does the same thing twice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Kind of a better way to identify it. You think of it like if it's pulling out database records, it wants to get the right exact one. Right? It's trying to compile a little stuff together and make sure it doesn't do the same thing twice. So now I can add my protected void do get. Right? And this is built to listen to a get request. Right? Do get takes in 2 parameters, HTTP servlet request takes in a request and a response. Wow. HTTP servlet response, response. And I need to import these guys. I'm going to close this outline to give us our space. Cool. This is also going to throw some exceptions. There's a possibility that the servlet isn't working. I could possibly get a servlet exception. Or I could get an IO exception where it can't listen to any of the framework and it doesn't have access to the file system.
So for those who are watching and I'm not really following, when things are, I guess, underlined with red and needed to be imported, Ammon is doing Control-Shift-O,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And here they are at the top, yeah.
Yeah, it's a Control+Shift+O. That's a 0. Auto import.
Yep.
That's our auto import. If I didn't want to do that, I could just hover over them and then typically pick the first one if it's there. If there's a couple, just kind of make sure you're pulling it from the right library. Most often there's only one. Yeah, Control-Shift-O, that's the awesome shortcut.
Yeah.
It'll also, if you have unused ones, it'll actually get rid of those ones too. So it'll clean up all of the imports on the page, which is wicked cool.
Yep. That's where the beans become cool beans.
Yeah. So what I want this to do is I'm just going to have this output to the console. This out. And here's the other shortcut. It's this out plus control space. Sys out and control space. Gives you system out print line. And it puts the cursor right between the parentheses. And it's going to say beans was called with a GET request. So if I run this guy, okay, I should be able to go to my page. I don't have it open. I don't have it open. All right. Localhost, we're at 8081. So if I go to localhost 8081, I don't get anything. But if I go to my address of /beans, okay, I get a blank page, and in my console it says beans was called with a GET request. Right, my browser is going to make a GET request for content. Okay. I can actually see it do this if I open up the inspector, go to the network, and refresh the page. Right. I can see a request here that's a GET request. It's making a GET request to this address. Right. So anytime you load up a page in a browser, it's a GET request. It's fetching data. So if I responded with some HTML would be displayed on the page. If I responded with some data would be displayed on the page. Right. So I could say after my output response get writer, right? Get writer writes to the response. Say append to add text on here. Say huzzah. Okay, it was highlighted for a second. So if I stop and play this again, I should get not only information on my console, but content on my page. Huzzah. I get text there, and I get a GET request. Right. I also get a couple of bits of more information pretty much saying that everything was hit. So anytime I do a request and I get some information back, typically I'll get a couple more lines in my console.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So GET request, right? Once we want to get the other types of requests, I need to step away from the browser and open up Postman, right? Because the browser doesn't have a really, it can, I don't doubt it could do it. It would just be complicated. Where Postman is built to do all of our HTTP verbs. Right? It's kind of its main function. It used to be a browser plugin. They made it its own standalone application. So if I go here and I say localhost 8081, wow, beans, I should get my same thing. Huzzah, right? I get content back. This is basically the same thing as when I'm looking at all the stuff in Chrome. Here's all this same information. Request URLs, there's headers over here too. There's all sorts of information. But basically it's a request and it's a response broken into two parts on this application. So if I were to make another request, maybe I want to send the data in. Right? I'm just going to copy and paste that first guy. I'm going to say do post. Our post is our second kind of request. Right? The GET request is a request for information. Okay? Should make no changes. A GET is just a fetch, pretty much just read this file, give me this content. Right? A post is a where I'm sending information. I want something made. Right? We can actually want to give some information to the server. We're posting it.
Yeah, equals to create.
Yep. So do post. Right? So I'm going to say with a post request, I'm going to start this off the same exact way. And then I'm going to see if I can pass a bit of information through. So if I do my GET request again, right, I get my beans was called with a GET request. But if I change the verb I'm using to a post, next one down, I get my beans was called with a post request. Right? Same address, two different HTTP verbs going to them. Right? They're sending in a request and I get back a response.
Yep.
Which is pretty cool. So I can get information out of the header, which is where it gets a little bit more complicated, right? I can send information in. Try to see if I can actually get information out of the body. Oh, that's a long hunk of stuff. I don't want to do that. So we'll get information out of the header. All right. So then the header is this guy. I can put keys and values. I can say name, Ammon. And I could send information along with my request. Right? My application isn't doing anything with that data. It's just kind of swallowing it and giving back a response no matter what. But let's see if I can output that data to my console. That means I've actually accepted data in and I can see it. I can modify it. So I need to make sure that I do that probably before the response writer. I'm going to drop that down a little bit. Right? And I'm going to say, this is going to be a string, name header equals request.get header. I need to get the header by its name. Right? Whatever key I gave it. Right?
Yep.
Okay. Give me that by its key. Right? And then.
So if you would name header something else other than name, it will not get it. I mean, it will get it, but it will just swallow it without returning it.
Yep. I'm going to see if I can just output this directly. Right? Because to read and write it should be fairly simple. To make sure it's there is where it gets complicated. If I'm manually adding it and I just want to see if this works, why do I have a... let's see. So if I send this now, it says beans was called with a post request and then Ammon.
There you go. That's cool.
If I change this to Frankenstein and send it, I should get a post request and then Frankenstein. Whatever information I send in through the headers, I get access to. Right? But I will run into a problem when I don't minimize that. But if this is not named right, I think I'll get an error message. Nope, I just get null.
Because Yeah, because it was reading. I think it's gonna run into issues when you have value nothing.
Yeah, when I try to use that, it's gonna have a problem too. So if I just do name with nothing, actually it doesn't have any value at all. Like there's no anything. So it's almost probably better to have a bad key than a bad value. Right?
Now we're just trying to break it.
Yeah. But and our lesson goes through some, like there's some other code to see. Here's this example here, right?
Yeah,
we want to see if it's null, if it's empty.
If it's not empty.
Value out, otherwise give it a default value, right? And then give it like a bad request, right? Like, hey, we are expecting this data, but nope, we got a bad request. You're supposed to craft this data model and send it to me, but you didn't give me the right thing.
Okay, now that you have that piece of code in there, can we try to generate that bad request response?
Yeah, so I actually need to.
But you got a header ID, you need to rename variables, right?
Yeah, so I need to generate my test header response.
Oh.
I'm gonna about that guy, so I need to rename some things. That guy, that guy, that guy. Cool. Then I'm gonna sys out test header response. Right. So here's where I should get, if there's nothing in there, or if the header's empty, I should get nothing, and then I should get my bad request. Right. Showing me an error right there.
But yeah, I see that too.
But there's no other.
There's nothing. Yeah, nothing there.
If I close the file and reopen it, it'll be gone. Yeah.
Oh.
Looks like it was just stuck. So if I send this in, I get nothing. And then my request actually says it's a 400 bad request.
I see. Right. That's where it shows.
My browser will get something that says it's a bad request, and then I can, like if I'm requesting this information or sending it, and the server responds back and says a bad request, I can say, well, right, maybe in here too, I said, I'm gonna, instead of huzzah, I'm gonna say bad request name was not present. And be a bit more robust, right? Because maybe my application was expecting a response back, and I can pop it up and say, hey, you know, flag the username field or the name field because it was invalid or it was empty or it required.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm kind of giving actionable data back to my front end. Right? This turns more into like just a data management system where it protects things that are going on. Right. There's not really a way for user to shove data in here that I'm not expecting to deal with. Right. So we can have front end validation to say that a field is required all we want. But someone could always try to open up Postman and send data in. And if my backend is not also kind of protecting its data, then there's kind of a loophole. So there should always kind of be a two-step. The front end should be quick security and quick like field validation, and the back end should be like the ultimate protector. It's still got to be a gateway into our data. Cool, I can send data in and do things with it. I could send in many headers and construct like an object or something out of it. Right? But that gets a little bit more complicated when we want to try to do it that way, which is where servlets are great to show how this works because there's a little bit more code in it. They're a pretty standard format. Right? I just wanted to do some simple responses or make like a simple, like send in your name, get your name with like today's date back, or get like the current weather or something. Right? It'd be a pretty quick and easy application to make. But then after that is where we run into controllers. So I'm going to make a real quick, kind of like the next level or next generation of this. I'm going to make a controller. Right? A controller is basically a servlet with a whole lot more precise control over it, right? Without quite as much code, which is kind of a win-win. So I'm going to call this guy a REST controller. import that. Right. So then I have access to a bunch of things. I have a at oh, jinkies. I have something called get mapping. I can make public string get name. I can return Ammon. I need to import get mapping. I'm going to give this guy its own address, kind of like that web servlet, by using an annotation called request mapping. It's going to be at name. Right. So if I go to /name, then I should get back Ammon when I send in a get request. So if I run this guy again, while that's running there, I'm going to pop up. I'm going to make a get request to name. I should get back Ammon. Right? A little bit more straightforward. I have a little bit more control over my method naming. Right? When I use just the raw HTTP servlet, it needs these like do get and do post. Right? It's expecting them to be there. I can actually, I think, drill into this. See, there's all sorts of built-in stuff into here. This is actually pretty good. Yep, here's like the default do get. Right, and we're kind of overriding that when we recall it, redeclare it. But by default, it is built up to do a couple things. And as you override or write your own ones, you get different types of requests and responses. Here's do post, and it has that same exact signature. Right? But by default, it's going to say, no, I don't know what to do with these requests until you implement them specifically.
Yeah.
Right? But a controller kind of gives you more more control. Right? I could make as many get mappings as I wanted to, as long as they have different names.
So is that in a way kind of the same thing that you did where you grabbed the name, converted it to a variable, and returned it? Is that what you do, or you're doing with the mapping?
So the request mapping just says what address I'm listening on.
Oh yeah. I forgot about the address piece.
Request. Right. I can also give these more specific names. Get Ammon. I could do a whole nother one. I could actually do two get requests as long as they have different addresses and different names. I can have as many get requests as I want.
Okay. And if you would go in the browser to /Ammon, then you get that.
So if I would have to do name /Ammon. Because now I'm kind of building a chain, right? The controller is accessed by /name, and the method is accessed by /Ammon.
Oh, I see.
And I'm still hitting the same controller, it's /name. But Frankenstein then gives me Frankenstein.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if this was, I know in our database stuff, we do a lot of like the Chinook sample database has like albums and tracks and employees. I could have like a music store and have it like employee to give me a list of employees. A list of customers. Okay, give me a list of customers. Right? I could kind of group them together. As that grows, might want to give each of those its own controller. But depending on how much you're working with, you can group stuff together different ways, which is pretty cool.
Yep. I have a meeting coming up in 4 minutes.
Okay.
So
yeah, I only got like 3 or 4 minutes myself here.
Perfect.
Yeah, and same thing with the other one. If I want other different types of requests, I just do post mapping. I do the same thing. I can say public. Now these guys do need to return something. Actually, string make name. I'm just gonna say return Ammon 2.
But you can't hit it in the browser though.
Correct. I can't make a post request manually in Chrome.
Yeah.
But I can in my Postman. So if I make a post request to /name/ no, it's gonna be just /name. Okay. Ammon 2.
Yep.
Right. But with a post request, I get some cooler things here. I get an @request. I need a model for that. I get access to both the URL and the body of the message. I don't have to rely on just the headers going across. I can send it like a whole big JSON object. Bind that to a model that I've pre-constructed behind the scenes. Right. So a lot more autonomy in using a controller. I don't have to go like line by line and take care of everything. It's kind of built to do this more complex communication.
Cool.
Which is pretty neat. Right? But it is running the same thing behind the scenes. It still is spinning up a Tomcat server and it's deploying my application to it. And this guy will actually tell me, I thought it would tell me the get routes. Maybe it doesn't. I thought it would show me all of the routes that I've made. But I may.
All right, I gotta drop off. Thank you, Ammon. That was helpful. Appreciate it.
All right, glad having you here. All right, so yeah, that's kind of the gist of the cover. Kind of a getting started with Spring. Right, the intent of the Spring Boot is to make web applications. Right, coming from programming foundations for making Java applications. Now we're making interactive web applications that don't rely on the console, right? Now we have the browser to do kind of our inputs and outputs. I can send data into the system with post requests. I can get data back out with GET requests. I can update data with put requests, and I can delete data with GET requests. Right? These two things work in tandem. I send in a request to the server, and I get a response back. I can see that more explicitly in my servlet, right? I send in a request and I get a response back. And I can write out data to the response. When I'm getting the headers, I'm pulling data off of the request, off the data getting sent in, right? My controller is a little bit not quite as verbose in saying it's doing that. But since my method is returning a value, it's going to give that back as a response. So a request comes in at my /name/Ammon address, and I give back a response of whatever I want. I'm returning a string Ammon. I could return a number. I could return a date. I could return a Boolean. I could return an array. I could return all sorts of stuff, which is pretty neat. It's a pretty strong, robust system. So a couple of the gimmies that we learned is that if we need to, we can change the port. Right? By default, though, the port will be 8080. And the console output would tell us this. Right? It's important to look at this console output because if there's any errors, our application won't run. Right? As well, if there's any errors, typically it'll only show you the bottom part because it's going to scroll the console, scroll up to the top of the error and see what it says. It'll probably try to give you a line number or something somewhere. And I also have access to this console as I'm building my application. Right? If I'm trying to troubleshoot and make sure this gets hit, right? I can like sys out a message. It works. Kind of prove to myself in a visual manner the request got sent to here. I don't even need to see the output in Postman. Right? I can send this request in. Let's do a GET request. To /Ammon. And I should get I did 8081. I changed it back to 8080. Right? It works. That thing got hit. If for some reason I didn't get this, then this method and this GET mapping is not getting accessed. Right? Make sure too that if you try to run your application twice, it's going to give you a problem. It's going to give you an error message saying the port is already in use, right? Because it's not stopping the previous application, you're just running a new one, right? So most often, first time you launch it, after that, press this relaunch icon. It sits up at the top. It looks like a little stop and a play button. That'll make sure that it's stopping the previous instance of your application and spinning up a brand new one for you, so you won't run into that issue. So cool. As soon as I get a notification this has been recorded and ready for me to download, I'll get this uploaded to our channel. And I hope this helps anyone getting started with Spring, maybe some common problems you might run into, kind of an overview of generally how it works. All right. I will see you all next time and have a happy holiday.